Hello, everyone, and welcome to this first attempt at something like a video sermon. The reflection you might have heard at church on Sunday if we were able to gather. This Sunday, we would have heard the story of the encounter between the Samaritan woman and Jesus at a well in the middle of the day, somewhere in Samaria. Now, social distancing has suddenly become part of our everyday speech. The reason I am preaching to a computer screen rather than to an assembly is a reflection of the fact that our church and other Episcopal churches and our siblings and friends in the Roman Catholic Church and a number of large evangelical churches too have all chosen to distance ourselves physically because of the coronavirus. It is a bit odd that our gospel reading today of that encounter between a Samaritan woman and Jesus has a kind of social distancing built into it. Also, in this case, to avoid a certain kind of contagion, ritual uncleanness, or religious impurity. Our Samaritan woman, who for me today is our protagonist, our hero, signals that social distance at the very beginning of the encounter. How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria? She asked Jesus. The Gospel writer wildly understates that Jews do not share things in common with Samaritans. I'd say not. As our resident New Testament scholar Renee Schreiner pointed out, a judgment from an ancient Jewish commentary on Jewish law designated Samaritan women as perpetually unclean, as if they were always experiencing their period, because any flow of blood made a person unclean. So this woman, at least in a certain Jewish imagination, was perpetually unclean along with any child she bore. So all Samaritans were. That judgment was tied to the fact that Samaritans were a mixed ethnic group, Israelites who had intermarried out of necessity with people imported by their imperial conquerors. Our Samaritan protagonist, our hero, bore the brunt of that judgment, particularly because she was a woman. There is so much more to that story, but for now it seems most important just to point out that the social distance between our hero and Jesus was connected not only to her gender, but to her body's function, to her culture and ethnic identity, and also to her religion. It was a massive social distance, and there was power involved too. Jesus' power as a man and a Jewish person over a woman of Samaria. Nevertheless, our Samaritan protagonist moves right across that distance. When the question of her husband comes up, she doesn't bat an eye. "You have had 5 husbands," Jesus says, "and the one you have now is not your husband." Now, who knows why she'd been married so many times, or if that was some kind of device for the writer of the Gospel of John to explain what's going on between Jews and Samaritans, or the history of Samaria. But whatever the case, our hero does not fall silent or look ashamed. In fact, she talks right back. "Sir, I see you are a prophet." And then she proceeds to engage Jesus about the religious differences between the Jews of Jesus' time and her own Samaritan practice. Whatever the social distance between them, this woman is not going to play by its rules. She's not willing to accept the limits placed on her by anyone's judgment, whether rabbis far away or the one right in front of her, Jesus in particular. And that's not all our Samaritan hero does. She's not content just to bridge the distance between Jesus and her. She carries what she has learned back to her community. She's the bridge across that social distance. She's the one that makes it happen. I think we're probably familiar with the kinds of social distance imposed on people like our Samaritan hero. Distance is imposed because of gender or skin color or sexual orientation. And then there are those imposed against people because they're experiencing homelessness, or experiencing poverty, or being made poor, or they have a particular illness, like the coronavirus. Many of us, I'm sure, can remember a time when HIV and AIDS, combined with the fear of people who were gay, came together to isolate people all the way to their deaths. And now, we as a church are actively pursuing social distance as a way to keep people well. We should be well aware that all those other distances have often been religiously reinforced. We should proceed with caution. There is a difference, of course. In this case, we must practice social distance as a religious practice because we need to create some space among us to defend those most vulnerable to this illness and to support those who care for them. And we should not forget those more insidious forms of distance. As we open the spaces between us, all those other destructive social distances that are always at work are going to become that much more obvious. Distances based on wealth, on cultural heritage or ethnicity or race, on employment, on health. It should not surprise us that public schools have resisted closing, because schools are among those few institutions that ensure that many children have enough food to eat and access to a nurse and the care a nurse can provide. The effects of that kind of distance between those with resources in reserve to face this epidemic and those made poor by low wages and lack of access to care, and so with no resources to engage it, that distance is only going to grow. So then, even as we take on a certain social distance as a religious practice to protect some and support others, how will we engage the other distances this epidemic will reveal? I hope to be inspired by our Samaritan protagonist, our hero, the woman who would not accept the unjust distances handed her and became herself a bridge across them. How might we follow her lead and bring living water not just to those made vulnerable by this illness, but those whose everyday vulnerability is unveiled by it? Friends, that's what churches are for. Let's follow the Samaritan woman's lead in reaching across that difference, and so continue to provide the kinds of connections that will heal us all.